My presentation is about comparing two methods that are selectional restrictions and semantic role labeling in prepositional phase disambiguation. So I will talk about selectional restriction first. And we can see the passing problem with the example here. With the prepositional phase with scissors and with pepper, it is hard to distinguish whether they are attached to the verb or the noun. So the problem here is that the passer may make unsound interpretations on syntactically grammatical phases, and our solution is to incorporate semantic knowledge into passing. So selectional restrictions is the restrictions that a word imposes on the surrounding words in the same context as the word. So it provides information to disambiguate the prepositional phase attachment. To capture the selectional restrictions, we can use selectional construct, and it is in the form of a tuple. The element of a tuple has a word, a semantic role, the restriction, and a set of prepositions. So how VerbNet can help? Because VerbNet is a dataset of frame syntax, and you can see an example of a frame syntax on the screen. The verb class of the verbs that have the similar usage pattern with the verb cut is in this format, which is agent, verb, patient, preposition, and an instrument. So when we have the frame syntax of a verb class, then it allows several selectional constructs. Just like the phrase Mary cuts apple with knife, it allows the construct of Mary cuts apple, and cuts with knife. And these constructs, they are all sensible. So WordNet can also help in this method because WordNet organizes the words into a synonym set, which is called syn set, and then therefore how a noun matches a restriction over a semantic role can be defined. Just like in the example, you can see if a noun with a property of intelligent control, it can satisfy the agent role. So how VerbNet and WordNet can help together? Once the selectional constructs are formed and the restrictions and roles are defined, we can incorporate these restrictions into passing. On the screen, you see the intuitive passing of two ambiguous phases. So the first one, the instrumental with, takes the prepositional object scissors to be attached to the verb cut. And in the second phase, the commutative with, it takes the prepositional object pepper and it is attached to the noun noodles. Both phases has the same surface form, but they will trigger different selectional constructs, and different selectional constructs will justify different prepositional object edges. So as a result, we will have semantically coherent passing. Look at the other method, prepositional semantic role labeling. The rationale behind this method is that the different senses of a particular preposition are so closely related that the preposition is highly ambiguous. So to select the semantic role for preposition, we can take the word sense disambiguation approach, which is to make use of the syntactic and semantic features in the same context as the preposition. The step is to use pen treatment as the semantic role inventory for preposition classification. The sentence in the treatment are passed and the prepositional phase are tagged and the governing verbs are identified. The next step is to use some features to classify the preposition, and these features are the syntactic and semantic features in the same context as the target preposition. Because the number of word collocations can be in huge amounts, so that there are some collocation constraints applied on the features. After the labeling machines are trained on pen treatment, which is passed, it is used to apply it onto a partially passed dataset. We have some subtasks to do to apply the machine on partially passed dataset. First is to determine the verb attachment site, then classify the preposition semantic role labels, and then determine the semantic role boundaries. These subtasks are used to identify the association between verbs and prepositions and disambiguate the semantic roles of preposition. So after these tasks are done, we can merge the two systems to do the labeling. Compare the two methods. Both methods do the disambiguations by analyzing the surrounding context. Selectional restrictions use it incorporates the semantic information to do the syntactic passing, and for the labeling system, it incorporates the semantic knowledge to do the collocation selection. And both methods relies on an available systematic word taxonomy to do the disambiguation, and selectional restrictions aims at complement various passing methods, and the labeling method aims at complement the holistic semantic role labelers. Two methods use different classification systems in machine learning. Selectional restriction use logistic regression classification algorithm because the tasks involved are non-sequential and the features are in small amount. And proposition semantic role labeling uses the decision tree classifier and maximum entropy learner because the tasks involved are sequential and also it involves a large amount of collocation features. So the types of attachment that can be disambiguate also differs in the two methods. Selectional restriction method is able to identify the verb attached, noun attached, and also between verb and noun attached prepositional phases. But prepositional semantic role labeling is limited to identifying the prepositional phase that are attached to verbs only. In the machine training of selectional restriction, it finds out that prepositions are biased to one or another attachment decision. So it shows that we can improve the classifier to include more features to increase precision. And the labeling method, because it is confined to analyze verb governing prepositional phases, so it is likely that only part of the senses of the prepositions are captured. So the semantic role labeling method aims at complement a holistic semantic role labeler, but the result of the merge of the two systems are unsatisfactory, and so it shows the need to develop more sophisticated features to improve the subtasks of semantic role labeling. And differently, selectional restriction methods it suggests a feasible way to incorporate parsing into the decision procedure of semantic role labeling, so it may overcome the conflicts from merging different systems. However, the selectional restriction method is not perfect because when prepositional phase involve negations and overstatements, the classifier will fail to assign a value because there are selectional restriction violations. So it implies that there is a potential to develop a selectional preference method rather than the rigid restrictions method.